Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast, Bone Bootcamp with Sarah Purcell. I'm your host, Sarah. This podcast, my newsletter, and all of my programs are designed to help women approach aging with confidence and courage. I'm specifically focused on bone growth promotion and skeleton-safe movements in Bone Bootcamp, the course, and Short and Sweet with Sarah, the membership. In this podcast, I strive to bring you all the most current information on living your best life as you age. Let's get on with today's episode. Hi, and welcome to the Bone Bootcamp podcast. Today, I've got Dr. Andrea Moore with me. She is not only a doctor of physical therapy, she's an orthopedic certified specialist, which I think is crucial, and she's a nutritional therapist and a life coach. So there's so many things we could talk about, but we're going to sort of steer closer to the pain topic today. And I'm going to let Andrea give us a little self-intro, if she doesn't mind.
Of course not. Thank you so much for having me. I'm just so excited to be here on this podcast with you. And I just love what you do. I think it's so amazing and needed.
It is mutual admiration.
Thank you. And yeah, so I have a long story. So just to keep it brief, it really is about a lot of things kind of being quote unquote wrong with me over, kind of my whole lifetime and having a lot of trouble getting help with them or being not quite broken enough for the medical community to really pay enough attention or really to give me anything that was helpful. So I dealt with a lot of chronic pain when I was younger and was having a really hard time getting anyone to really listen to me and take me seriously. It was usually, me getting brushed off, me being, told basically like, hey, suck it up, things like that. And
so helpful.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Like it's in your head. It's, oh, it's not that bad. Clearly that can't really, that's just what you should feel like. And for a while, I actually just thought it was normal. I'm like, I guess this is just what it feels like to be in a body. And it was actually after I graduated physical therapy school. And in physical therapy school, we're always taught, someone comes in with knee pain or back pain, you always ask, like, does anything else hurt? And I would ask people this question, and people would be like, nope. And I'm like, what about like your back? What about your shoulder? Like you don't have any other aches or pains? And they're like, nope. And I'm like, wait, what? People don't just like walk around with all their joints hurting? And it really wasn't until like I heard this feedback over and over that I'm like, oh, what I'm feeling isn't really normal. Like I'm not crazy. And so I really just dove in even deeper because things I was learning in physical therapy school were extremely helpful for some aspects, but they weren't addressing my body. And that's actually when I dove into the nutritional therapy piece and then really deep dove into the more pain science piece, because I think now it's becoming a little bit more common to be taught in physical therapy school, but it wasn't when I went almost 10 years ago now. Okay. So yeah.
And you and I have talked about the fact that my favorite introduction into pain science, I guess, is Dr. Lorimer Mosley's introduction on YouTube. It's a TED Talk. And you told me that just scratches the surface. So maybe I'll let you explain succinctly, better than I could, his little story of pain. And then possibly tell us how to develop beyond that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I highly, highly recommend his TED Talk. If you haven't seen it, for anyone listening, go watch it. He's an amazing speaker. It's a wonderful talk. And I think the talk's about 15 minutes. So it's going to go even more in depth on some aspects than we will today. So it's definitely worth the watch. But like Sarah said, it just really scratches the surface. What his little story at the beginning is that he's walking through the brush and, he feels a little nip at his leg and there was no pain. And then it turns out he was bitten by a very poisonous snake. And he somehow lives to tell the story. And then later on, he's walking through the brush again and feels this tiny little nip at his leg, and he is in excruciating pain. And what this is really getting at is, in this moment, his brain freaks out because the last time he felt that type of sensation, he almost died. And so the brain is like, oh my gosh, we have to get you help. You need to pay attention to this. You could die, almost die again. Like, pay attention. And the brain gets our attention with pain, because guess what? Pain works really, really well to get your attention, right?
It does get your attention. And that turned out to just be a twig.
It was just a twig. Exactly. Yeah. And so it's a great example of sometimes when our brain, and this is what where he just scratches the surface, is it's that our brain ultimately is making decisions constantly. It is trying to predict, hey, what does this mean? What is this? And sometimes the prediction is incorrect. Sometimes it's blown out of proportion. And sometimes, like in the first case, it might even be underreporting. And it turns out that no matter what is happening in your body, and I like to be dramatic. It's like you could have a knife stabbed in your thigh. The pain you feel is generated by your brain's interpretation of what is happening in that scenario.
Okay.
And so where this just scratches the surface is your brain is so incredibly complex. Right. And while obviously the sensation itself is sending it, we have hundreds, if not thousands, of different types of receptors that are just sending information over and over and over to the brain. And so any of this information the brain's getting can be being taken into account. And some of these things are not just past experiences, but it's also emotions, beliefs, kind of where you are, things that you're hearing, anything you've been exposed to, along with the actual physical sensation, the pressure, the temperature, things like that. So your brain has to make a split-second decision in that moment of, do you need to know about this? Yes. And what can lead to that decision is incredibly complex.
Yeah. And then you and I talked about how I discovered that on my own with some low back pain, that I now know that what I had been doing was I wasn't being particularly careful and mindful about my around the house activities. And I was really flexing my low back in many activities that I didn't think I was doing it in. So I reached down for a tennis ball one day, and it was a spasm. And I'm thinking back to, did I deadlift wrong yesterday? But it wasn't really about that. My form is great in my deadlift. It was all these other things I was doing. But my story for you that I'd love for you to dig deeper into was I got 2 therapy balls and I put my bottom on the therapy balls. So I'm in a pose on the ground, face up, very much like somebody would do a bridge from. So their heels are beneath their bum cheeks. And I lift my bum, I put those 2 balls in there, and I can tuck and untuck my tail and feel absolutely lovely and safe. Take the balls out. I try to tuck my tail, try to imprint my back on the ground, and oh my gosh, no, don't do that. I come back up, get the balls, tuck and untuck, delightful.
Yeah.
So what's going on?
It's so fascinating, isn't it? And I love when you can have examples of that where it's literally the same joints moving and the sensation is completely different.
Yeah.
And it's such a great example of especially when you can do that the pain that you're experiencing when you're down on the ground, your brain, again, for a myriad of reasons, is associating that with a threat in that particular moment. And it's like, I don't like that. And for whatever reason, when you're up on the balls, and again, this is where it can be so individual, whether it's the pressure of the balls or it's just a different plane of motion, or,
Mm-hmm.
your brain's like, I don't have that feedback from the ground on your back. Your brain's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I'm going to interpret this different. And we know,
Right.
though, in that moment that your joints, your discs, your ligaments, all your spinal structures aren't the ones that are creating the pain. Because if they were, it wouldn't
Yeah.
matter what position you were in.
Right. So, and that's what I came to the conclusion in my own little investigation was, okay, I didn't just herniate a disc. Like, that would hurt no matter what. So something else is going on. And my goal with myself and with my clients is, in my non-doctor of physical therapy way, how can we create safety so that I
It's
can get back?
absolutely. And this is kind of the $1 million question, because creating
Yes.
safety is like kind of the first step that needs to happen. And let's even back up a second of like, why do we even
Okay.
want to create safety or, get movement? Because I know in your
Mm-hmm.
population with osteoporosis, there is actually a lot of fear that
Yes,
is surrounding movement.
there
So it's
is.
when you're hearing after the if you have been diagnosed with osteopenia or osteoporosis, like, oh my gosh, you have to avoid these movements, you might get a fracture. That right there is going to create a threat around movement.
Mm-hmm.
And it creates a vicious cycle, because what you can see happen in some people is they get this diagnosis, they become scared to move because of what they've been told. And then if you go research
Mm-hmm.
online, you become even more
Yeah.
terrified. And then guess what that leads to is less movement,
Mm-hmm.
atrophy of the muscles, and then that creates a vicious cycle, because when you have atrophy of the muscles, less movement, that's actually going to put the brain on increased alert.
Alert.
And it's going to have
Mm-hmm.
increased sensitivity to any movement that does happen, because it's like, whoa, what are we doing here? And the less muscle
Right.
mass you have, the less protected your spine actually is. That's the
Right.
whole catch-22 is actually the more muscle mass you have. That's why I love what you do so much. The stronger you can get women, and the more muscle you have, the more protected it is. The more you
Right.
can kind of move, quote unquote, incorrectly and be less likely to injure yourself, because that
Yeah.
muscle mass is so protective.
Right.
So it's like, how do
And
we?
so
Mhm.
yeah, I was just going to
Yeah,
interrupt you
go
and
ahead.
say, so when someone has had a diagnosis, and we all read that thoracic fractures, the upper, from your neck through your rib cage, those spinal column vertebral bodies are a very likely site of fracture. And we also read that fractures can be silent until they happen. And then, little fissures are silent, and then boom, you break, and there's a lot of pain. So we frequently hear that women who've just begun to start to try to build muscle again, and might be doing something with their arms straight out in a T, and maybe they're even moving that thumb, their palms are up, and they move the thumb a little bit behind them, trying to use some muscles,
Mhm.
that the next day those muscles are sore, but possibly it's interpreted by your brain as pain. Could that be
Yes.
true?
Oh,
Okay.
absolutely. This is so common. And this is where it's so helpful to work with someone who is experienced and can guide you through this process.
Mm-hmm.
So, like you, Sarah, you know which muscles are being used in exercises. So that way, if someone is doing a session with you and they're sore, they can come back and be like, hey, this is where I'm sore. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can be like, yes, we worked all those muscles, here they are. You can even show them on a picture, these are the muscles. And if it
Mm-hmm.
kind of fits what you did, then hey, we know it's the muscles. And
Right.
ultimately, for the most part, if pain is in the muscle bellies themselves, And again, if you don't know where your muscle bellies are, Google can help with that. But also, if you've been working with a trainer or anything, like your biceps muscle, I know not everyone's here checking video, but it's like your muscle belly is right, smack in there. So you make your strong arm there. Yep. It's like where you're feeling that bulk of the muscle. If the pain's kind of anywhere along the muscle belly, it's not in your joints. Like we really, the chance of a fracture like there and having pain there is pretty much null. And I want to add another piece to that. Well, actually first, so just knowing what muscles you've worked is so important, because if you're working those muscles for the first time and the soreness is in those muscles and you're perceiving it as pain, which is very, very common, what can help bring safety to that is this in itself, is being like, yes, brain, we just worked those muscles. What you're feeling is muscle soreness, which can hurt. Let's be real. When you're waking some muscles up, it can be pretty painful. And also, hey, this is good. This is how we strengthen, right? And it's almost like being like, this is a good thing. This means I'm getting stronger. This means we worked the right places. So just having that mindset shift around that can be so helpful for bringing in that safety. And then the next piece, just because you mentioned the thoracic fractures themselves, I want to add to that, there's some really good research done around those. I'm not sure if you're familiar with a study of the sham surgeries. Have you heard about that?
Oh my gosh, yes. Oh my gosh, yes. So go right ahead and tell that story.
Yeah. And so I should have had I don't have the exact numbers with me. So if I quote any numbers, they may not exactly be accurate, but they're hopefully pretty close.
Yeah.
But so they took women and men, I believe, who had thoracic, these fractures in their vertebral bodies. And in half of them, they gave them actual surgery that they would give to fix the fracture. And all of these people were having pain and symptoms along with these fractures. In the other half, they did a sham surgery, which means they put them under anesthesia. They created kind of all the same noises and the same scenario, but they didn't, and they did actually do an incision, but they did not fix the fracture. Everyone, whether they received the sham surgery or the real surgery, had improvements in their pain levels and their function. Isn't that incredible? So the people who, they did not get their fracture fixed, they felt better, they had less pain, and they got back to doing the things that they wanted to do. And then they were told, I think about 6 months later, I don't know exactly when, hey, you actually had a sham surgery. You didn't actually get it fixed. Now you have the opportunity. Do you want to actually get it fixed? And I believe this is around, I don't know the exact numbers, I think almost all of them, if not all of them, denied. They didn't want to get it fixed. Because they were like, I'm feeling fine. So this is where sometimes we get scared of these things, like a thoracic fracture, which sounds super scary. And it
sounds horrid.
It might not be as scary as we think it is. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't, you know what I mean?
Very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And same thing, I know you mentioned disc herniations earlier and things like that. Even disc herniations, I've seen so many throughout my 10 years as a physical therapist. They often get better on their own.
Right.
Just the fact that our bodies are so resilient and heal. They do studies where they follow up. They've done like MRIs weekly after someone herniates their disc, and with I think it's just like conventional, like pain, medication, and rest. Like I don't even think there's any physical therapy in these. They MRI them every single week, and I think about 50% of them just completely resolve on their own. Like in 8 weeks, the herniation is gone. It's just been resolved.
Right.
And that's not even with like therapy. So therapy, you can up that number significantly. So at the end of the day, yes, these things can be scary and they can absolutely hurt. And if we don't move and we're so scared of them, we're pretty much guaranteed to be in pain. Because not moving our bodies is one of the number one things that will give us pain.
That's such the conundrum, because I've got a lot of people that I work with who have intermittent or chronic low back pain. And I know you work with a lot of people with low back pain. And a good percentage of the women I work with, when they get stronger, the low back pain will dissipate. They'll be like me and have an incident every once in a while after maybe some mindless activity. Mm-hmm. But there is a portion where they probably need something more than exercise and working out, because it just keeps coming back. And they try something with me, they try to hip hinge, and it just keeps coming back.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes. And I think you said it so well of like, there's these people, if you just kind of work through pain a little bit, get stronger, the pain actually can go away. And in others, that doesn't work. Because for others,
Right.
if it's so embedded in like your nervous system, your whole nervous system, that like movement is a threat, then moving and exercising can actually increase that sensitivity of your nervous system and create more pain. And that is the conundrum.
Now that's horrible.
Yeah.
Right?
And in those people, what I will say, while yes, short term not moving can sometimes feel better, it will always lead to more pain down the road not moving. And so often, again, in the medical community, these people get kind of screwed over. I don't have another nicer way to say it.
Right.
Because oftentimes their doctors don't know what to do with them. They prescribe medications, which, I mean, can briefly be helpful. Medications can have their place, absolutely, but aren't going to help in the long term. And there's a lot of research to show this. And so it's what happens when your nervous system is fearful of movement. And this is really where I love working with people. And these are my favorite people to work with. It's like the people who have tried everything. And either maybe they get short-term relief, you know, maybe they get a massage or acupuncture or chiropractor or whatever. And they're like, I feel better for like a couple of days, and then it comes back. Or like they can't add any activity in. And that's really where we get down to a much deeper level of bringing safety to the nervous system. It's almost a traumatized nervous system. So it needs to be dealt with in a, like, as trauma would be dealt with, which is very, very different than,
I see.
Yeah. Just so for some people, like where like Lorimer Moseley's going back to that, just learning about pain and how it works for some people is like, oh, okay, pain itself doesn't actually mean I have an injury. It's just my brain being like, you know, kind of
don't do that
to the extreme. Yeah, exactly. And then I can like analyze a situation and see if that actually makes sense, or if, you know, or if it doesn't. And some people are like, cool. And then that's all they need, and they are good to go. For others, that type of just learning about pain can actually make them feel kind of worse. Like, wait a minute, so now what? Like, oh, so it's just a problem in my brain, and what do I do? Now I'm stuck. And it's and that's where it's not just a problem in your brain. Your brain is involved, but it's both top down, meaning the brain talks to the body, but the body also talks to the brain. So we have to work from both ends. And so we need to bring in safe movements, which might be tiny, tiny, tiny movements. And as you're doing them, do some processes that actually bring safety around them, which is going to look different for everybody. And it's very individualized.
So you truly work right now one-on-one with clients so that you can find out everything that brought them to this place, because that's how you figure out your individualized program. Is that right?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, so my programs for everyone look very different.
Okay. And you're looking very holistically at their body, at their whole system, their mind-body connection. And how long would one session, is it usually an hour to do a session?
Yeah, it's about an hour. Sometimes if I'll do some deep somatic work, which is really, that's really more of the trauma work, where we're really diving into the body and releasing things, and all kinds of fun stuff happens. So sometimes if we're really deep into a process, it can go longer, like it can go 75 minutes and a little bit longer, but usually about an hour.
And, you know, it just sounds so fascinating. I want to do it just to see what gets done. It's like,
super fun.
That sounds so cool. But you also have a system for your clients, because when you've tried everything and nothing works, and that's how they end up with you as a pain specialist, you kind of have some parameters or boundaries that you give people.
Absolutely. Yes. And my goal, so I usually work with people in packages, so it's like 3 to 6 months long, because it takes chronic pain itself takes about 3 to 6 months to form, because it's causing changes in your nervous system. And so it takes time to reverse those. And so my goal in working with people is not just that we help them feel better, help to calm their nervous system, but also that I'm giving people tools to continue on this work on their own.
Mm-hmm.
I really, really try to have, because obviously I love to keep seeing my people, and they're welcome to keep seeing me. And I also really want them to be able to feel really empowered that, let's say we're no longer working together, they're feeling better, that if they do wake up in pain one day, because it's going to happen, because we all have bodies, and bodies just are in pain sometimes. It's the reality. No one's getting out of this world without pain, that they then know what to do. Because oftentimes when we're in pain, we have the pain itself, like the physical sensation, but then we have the added emotional pain and the added suffering that comes from our thoughts and our feelings about the pain. Because when you wake up in pain, or you bend down and pick up a ball, and your back spasms, and let's say you had an important meeting later that day, or something that you needed to go to, your brain is like, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do this? Oh my gosh, what's going to go on? How am I going to take care of my kids? How am I going to pick up my grandkids? And blah, 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 blah. And that causes so much, not only just emotional suffering, but then what it does is it actually just ramps up your nervous system more, because your brain is like, ooh, we're really worried about this. This must be bad. Let's make sure you're really hearing this. And even just our thoughts and feelings about our pain can actually increase the sensitivity of our nervous system, which actually can lead to increased pain levels.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Adding insult to injury.
Exactly. It really is. And a great example is, just especially because this is women, is let's just take childbirth, okay? Like it's gonna hurt, okay?
It's gonna hurt. Absolutely.
And it's momentarily. That's not chronic pain. That is like acute, in the moment pain.
Right.
And we can learn all sorts of techniques to help bring down the pain in the moment. Right? Not a lot of pain isn't, again, avoidable. You chop your finger off, whatever things happen, you bend down. Pain is going to happen. And no matter if it's acute or chronic, we can also always bring it down in the moment too. Because once we can assess the threat, kind of realize, okay, and again, let's go back to the knife in the thigh. You might be like, yeah, this is really serious. So you got to take yourself to the hospital, right? And on that ride to the hospital, or ambulance ride, whatever, why not know how to bring your pain levels down? You know you're getting it treated. You're attending it. It doesn't mean you ignore it. It's not about laying like, oh, this doesn't exist. Let's not treat it. It's let's treat it and bring down our pain levels at the same time. You know what I mean? Like, you can do both.
Right.
I think sometimes people hear that it's, the brain is involved, and they think that means don't treat the actual body. And it's like, no. You have to treat the body too. And you don't need to suffer as much while you're treating yourself.
Right. And I'm going to circle back to your 3 to 6 month statement, because to some degree, I think it made me have a sense of calm, of saying, oh, this isn't going to go away right away. It took time to create. It's going to take time to uncreate. And there's some comfort in that, in my mind, when you're not on pins and needles saying, do I feel better yet? Do I feel better yet? Is it fixed yet? You're instead saying it's a process. And I trust Dr. Moore, and I'm going to give it time.
Yes, I love that. And I'm so glad it brings that sense of calm, because that really is honestly the goal. Because it is going to take time, and to think anything else is not only just a misunderstanding of how chronic pain works and how the brain works, but it's a disservice to the person. Because if you are, expecting you're going to get some magic results that last, that's the thing, is you can get some pretty cool results in very, very short. People have probably experienced that. You can do something and you can make the pain go away, and it's going to come back.
Yeah. Well, that sort of reminds me of the old pigeon stretch conundrum. Because it sometimes for people with sciatic pain or piriformis pain, they feel in the moment that figure 4 stretch or pigeon stretch, they're like, oh yeah, that's getting into that spot. But doesn't it always come back?
Yes.
Because some habit got you there. Mm-hmm. And if we don't address the habit, the physical habit, and now I'm talking more biomechanics, but if we don't address what gets you that feeling, the stretch itself is temporary. So I think what I hear you saying is people do get relief from acupuncture or chiropractic or other things, but maybe there's long-lasting results that are just a little bit out of reach. And maybe even strengthening your muscles, it still leaves long-lasting results out of reach, is what I'm really starting to gather from you. That if we don't address the whole system of our mind-body and our nervous system, we may just have some cycles that our body enjoys going into.
Absolutely. And really, for anyone listening, if you feel fear around your pain, anxiety around your pain, chances are just working on strengthening isn't going to lead to those long-lasting results.
It's not. Yeah.
And I also want to say about the short-term pain relief, there's a place for short-term pain relief.
Yeah.
I actually teach a system to all my clients that help with short-term pain relief, because who doesn't want short-term pain relief, right?
Of course.
But it's very much taught as this is short-term pain relief, and this is what to expect. And then almost like, okay, so we can bring down your pain and then go move and strengthen so you can do your movement practice. Right. You can strengthen and with less pain. And then tomorrow you're probably going to wake up and, your pain might be back, but you were able to get an exercise session, right? And when people know that that's what it's for, it also, again, like you said, it kind of brings that sense of calm. It's that, okay, I wasn't expecting this to fix my problem. I was using this method or this exercise or the stretch, whatever it is, so I can feel better for the next 30 minutes, hour, day if you're lucky. And that's cool. That's all I was expecting out of it. Right. And then I'm layering on these longer things, these deeper things that will help get to it. And it will last longer as you go into it.
So you have short-term and long-term goals.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes if you can't...
That's really cool. Mm-hmm. So who is your typical client?
Again, women who have tried everything. Most of my clients have been in pain for probably 10 or more years. Really, anyone who's been having pain for more than 6 months, you've tried all the things. You've tried physical therapy, you've tried the chiropractor, you've tried what your doctor told you, and you're feeling stuck, and you're not quite sure of the next thing to do. And let's say, especially if okay, well, either all your scans are normal, or even if they're not, even if there are findings on it, but they're kind of like, well, we don't know what to do next. Those are the women I see.
Okay.
Yes, and
well, that's huge.
Yeah,
that's huge, because being at your wit's end and being in pain is just a prescription for more pain.
Exactly, and it really is about at first just shifting relationship with pain and actually seeing it as this healing gift that can be given to us, and it's just like, are you ready to listen to what your pain is trying to tell you? Because pain is always a messenger. Pain is always trying to communicate something. And it's just about being able to listen to that message interpret it, because it can be like, what does this mean? Sometimes it's like it's another
Mm-hmm.
language. And then acting on what it's either acting on what it's telling you, if that's appropriate, or being like, actually this message isn't even true anymore. Sometimes the message is really outdated. Like it's an
How
outdated
interesting.
fear for like a
Yeah.
great example would be a car accident, right? If you were in a car accident, and a lot of people can relate to this or know someone who can relate to this, and you drive by the area where you were hit or the
Mm-hmm.
person was hit, they can feel all their muscles tense up. And
Yeah.
it can be a very, very physical reaction. And in that moment, it's an outdated fear, right? It's
Right.
not necessarily helpful to have all your muscles tense up. It actually is going to make it harder to pay attention to the road. And so
Right.
when we can update and like, hey, be like, hey, brain, guess what? Here's our current reality. Because ultimately your brain's in a dark box. It can't really see the world, right? It's just getting input from your body. And it sometimes
Right.
needs to know that sometimes some of the things that it does have fear and anxiety about were once really, really valid and need to be, like, we need to have so much compassion for them, and even thank them for how much it has been trying to keep us safe. And we can now move on.
So it really sounds to me like there are some of us who get to a point where we need a guide, that
Yeah.
we don't do that deep work without someone who's taking us on that trip, just like a good travel guide. You're
Yes.
taking them, you know the terrain, and you're taking them in expert hands on a guide to safety and less pain. I sound
Absolutely.
like a promotion, but but
No.
I'm fascinated because my heart goes out to all the women that I talk to who are in chronic pain, and I have a spouse who's in chronic pain, so I totally, I see it at home, and it's hard. It's really hard. So you give some hope. I think your message is wonderful.
Thank you.
And can you tell me, we will, of course, have some things in the show notes, but can you tell the listeners how to find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram is the easiest place. I'm Dr. Andrea Moore, DrAndrea Moore. And also my website is drandreamoore.com. And you can find me there. It's
Great.
spelled the same way.
Yeah.
And I have
All right.
free
Yes.
consult calls, if that helps anyone to know. Free consults. It's so important to me that I'm a good match for somebody, or if I feel like, let's say I talk to somebody and I feel like they could use something else, that part of what I love to do is to connect people to the right practitioner, which may or may not be myself.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And so if it's something, if seems like this is really connecting with you and resonating, then please just feel free to sign up for Discovery Call. No obligation. I love talking with women and just helping them figure out the next best step for them.
Oh, well, I love your passion for helping women. I think we both feel the same way about that. There are a lot of scary things out there as we age, and helping each other is the best thing that we can do.
Absolutely.
So I'm really happy to have had this chance to talk to you, and I hope some of you out there just go for a discovery call. It can't hurt, and you might find out that maybe there's a different idea. Maybe you're ready to work with Dr. Moore, or maybe you need something else, and she can send you to that practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for joining me.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Bone Bootcamp podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're loving the podcast, please subscribe. Also, share with a friend. I would really appreciate it. And if you're inspired, a really helpful thing to do is leave a review on iTunes or Spotify. Thank you again for joining me. See you in the next episode.